Hey gang, welcome back. Jeff Marshall here. Today we are going to talk a little bit about second intervals. This is diatonic seconds. Okay, we've heard of like diatonic thirds, diatonic fourths, fifths, sixths. Don't talk a lot about diatonic seconds, but they can be a pretty cool sound. So as you saw in the intro there, I was kind of demoing what that kind of sounds like. You can hear this kind of natural dissonance that occurs by rubbing these notes together. And for the most part, you have to kind of play them on adjacent strings. It's really kind of the only way it works. So we're going to take a look at some of those shapes. Of course, I was using it in more of a modal context. I was doing it in the key of C, but playing it over D minor, which gave us kind of a Dorian type sound. So of course you can use this in any mode, but we'll just look at it in the key of C. You can apply it to any of the modes of the key of C, just depending on which chord you play it against. So let's go ahead and jump over. We're going to do this in real time so that you can actually see the fretboard diagram and how it pans out on the guitar. Let's do it. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and bring up the fretboard here. And these little diagrams here are great for visual references and visual aids. And seeing how we're going to do it in the key of C, we're going to just start on the top two strings. This is where I find it to be kind of the most effective, because a lot of times you're going to play these maybe more in an improvised solo or something like that. So you're probably going to be on the top string groups here. So we'll start on the top two strings to begin with. And just for, just going down as far on the fretboard as we can, let's start on this D note here. And then we have an E, open E, and that is obviously a whole step apart. Of course, both of those notes are in the key of C. All right, so, of course, you can refer to the music here. It might be a little bit easier just to see what it looks like on the tab. So let's go to what would be the next one. Now, some of these can be a little bit of a stretch, but I'm going to show you also how you might be able to even kind of form little chords out of them and stuff too down the road here. So there's our next shape, and of course this far down on the guitar, that is a little bit of a stretch. So be careful while you're working these out, of course, but you probably want to get your thumb down in the middle of the back of the neck so you can make those stretches. Now, of course, this gets a little bit easier as we go up the fretboard, right? So the next one would be from this F note here. We'd have G on the high E string. All right, and I'm just doing them as eighth notes just so we can kind of see them. The next one would be G and A. So now the stretch here is not so bad. Something you might play in a pentatonic scale or something like that, so not that big of a deal. Then we would have A and B. That's basically the same shape, up a whole step. All right, and then we would have B and C. Now, this is two whole step stretch here, but it's getting a little bit easier because we're a little bit further up on the guitar. Then we would have C and D. There's that kind of pentatonic-y shape, if you will. Then we would have D and E. And then we would have E and F. Now it's getting to be a little bit of a stretch there, but that's kind of where we started down here, but that's obviously a little bit softer there. I'm just going to continue about as far as up as I can go here. So we got F and G, and then we've got, G and A, okay, and then A and B, and let's say that's about as far as we can go. So I'm going to put a little rest there. We'll make that a half note rest, and that kind of works out for our top strings there. So let me see if I can just make this visually a little more appealing. And whoops, let's undo that. All right, so on the guitar, just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm doing there, I'm saying the D note here. I'm starting as kind of far down the neck as I could go, and I'm playing it against the E note. And then we have this shape here. It's a little bit of a stretch there. There's our next one. Next one. It's getting a little easier as we go up the guitar. Okay, so let's stop there for a second, and I'll show you a few things that I like to do with these kind of shapes, okay? And of course, you could apply this to some of the other shapes on the different string groups too. But the high E and the high B string are cool because that's a lot, we spend a lot of time there when we're improvising. Now, what I like to do is just start to manipulate some of these. So let's say if I take something like this, if I start here, what I like to do is maybe add that note and then move that sequence of the guitar. So I'm actually going from this interval, which is a second interval, to a third interval here. So that's kind of a nice move, and of course you can do it the other way too. And you can hear that kind of notes rubbing against each other. And these are just little tricks and little moves that I like to do with some of these shapes. So you can also do that with the top string too. So I might start off with this second interval here and then move it up to a third. So those are just some kind of little clever moves that you can do with these. Of course, you can just run them up too, right? That's kind of a cool sound too. I'm kind of splitting the notes up, but you could put them together if you want to. So, you know, you want to get a little repertoire, a little vocabulary going on with some of these ideas. Another one I like to do is lead into, like, let's say we lead into this note with a scale phrase. So those are kind of nice sounding too. And sometimes I might do something like this where I'll lead into it and do a little pull off on that. So, you know, what I'm trying to do is just build up a little vocabulary so I'm not just kind of going up and down them. I'm trying to find some clever ways to see them, so to speak, all right? Okay, let's take a look at the next string group. Okay, so now we're going to go over to our D and G, excuse me, the B and G string, and arguably these might be a little bit easier in some cases because of the way the guitar is tuned. You know, the shapes that are between the G and the B string tend to be a little bit easier. So I'm going to go all the way down here. I'm going to start on A, and we're going to rub that up against the open B string. And then we're just going to start moving it up the scale, and I'm going to change that to eighth notes just so it doesn't take up the whole paper here to, whoops, let's undo that. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so the next one will be B and C, right? Now normally that would be like two whole steps on the high E string and the B string, but it softens it up a little bit here because of the way the guitar is tuned. So that's a double bonus there, right? Now the next one will be C and D. All right, I'm just going to continue on, keep things moving here. Here we have another half step move here. And arguably the half step ones to me are the most interesting ones because they provide the most dissonance. And we just keep traversing up. Remember, we want to stay in the key of C. And then we're kind of back to where we started there with A and B. Then we have B and C. That's another half step move there. And then we have C and D. I'm just going to kind of carry it as far up the guitar as I can go. And we're going to go maybe all the way up to E and F here. And let's go. We can go one more here. F and G, I suppose, something like that. All right. That's about as far as I can go with that. All right, so I'm going to put a little eighth note rest there and then a quarter note rest just to finish off that measure, and we should be good to go. So there's our top ones, top two sets of strings there, right? And I'm just going to try to organize that a little bit better. So just a side note, you know, this is something that I do regularly for my Patreon folks if you're watching on YouTube. And I make, of course, the stuff that I'm tabbing out and everything, I make that available to my Patreon folks, of course, right? And there's different tiers. Anything that I release on YouTube, you can get from just the basic tier, which is just a couple bucks a month. It just helps support the channel, and it's much appreciated. But if you want to go a little bit deeper, there's different levels. There's a kind of an intermediate level, there's an expert level, there's a pro, and then there's an actual rock star level, I call it, which also includes a monthly lesson. Now, all of them also include a monthly live stream where I talk about topics that some people might want to talk about inside of the Patreon, or just things that I come up with that might be relevant at the moment. So I just try to keep it loose and fun. But, it's always great to have supporters, and I really enjoy, I've got decades of playing the guitar and teaching and everything. So it's always great to share knowledge with folks too. Okay, I'm going to do another string group here. Let's jump over to our screen here, and let's go over. I'm going to scroll up here so we can see, and I'll do one more string group here. I don't usually go too much lower than this, although of course you can, and perhaps you even should. But just for speediness sake, I'm only just going to kind of do the top couple string groups here. Okay, so let's start here, and let's go back to our eighth notes. Let's go F and G, okay? And now we're on the D and the B, D and the, I can't talk today, it's crazy. D and the G string, all right? Now we're gonna go G and A, all right? And then we're gonna go A and B. Now here we're gonna get some of these bigger stretches for the half steps, right? B and C. And we're kind of back to the same shapes that we're gonna see on the other two string groups. Okay, so we got C and D here, then we got D and E, then we have E and F. All right, now there's another half step. And then we have F and G, of course, and then G and A. We're kind of back to where we started up here. A and B, and then B and C. There's another one of those half steps. I'll see if I can squeeze one more in here. C and D. All right, cool. And let's just finish that off with a quarter note rest and see if we can see those. Oh, actually, that would be a half note rest. Let's fix that. Half note rest. Now we can go over to another thing. Okay, now here's the thing that you have to realize about the guitar. And, the interesting thing is I didn't realize this for a long time, but because of the way the guitar is tuned, it's tuned in fourths, right? So, when you go to tune a guitar the old-fashioned way, which is to kind of do this, the old, that kind of thing, which we all know and love, we all do the same thing except for between that G and B string, we go back one, right? That's because those two notes are a third away, but the rest of them are all a fourth away. So you can use that to your advantage, because if they're all a fourth away, that means the shapes that you find on any adjacent string group, this would be for intervals or triads or anything like that, aside from the G and the B string, are all the same. So once you kind of learn one, it kind of transfers to the other one. That would be whether you're learning your intervals, like we're doing seconds or thirds or fourths or fifths, or if you're doing triads. Here, I'll give you an example. So for example, if I play a C major triad here, I'll start on the low E string. Let me get my hands here. So here's a C major triad. Okay, now if I want to play that from an A string root, it's the same fingering, right? And also from the D note, or D string, I should say, same fingering. Also from the B and the E string. See, that's all the same shape. The only place that changes is between the G and the B string because of the way we tune the guitar. So that's the only thing. So that's the same for intervals. If I play a third interval here, or a third interval here, or a third interval here, or here, it's the same fingering. The only place it changes is between the G and the B string. So that's what I'm talking about there. So just a little side note, and you can use that to your advantage, because that means you don't have to relearn the guitar all the time. Once you kind of learn something on a set of strings, it transfers to almost all of the other string groups except for that one between the G and the B. So note to self. Okay, so a few things about some of these intervals. So if we take a look at some of these intervals, let's look at the G and the B string for a minute, okay? Now, if I play a B note and a C note here, Now, if I change out a bass note, let's say if I add a bass note, if I add an A to that, it's kind of like an A minor 9 sound. So you can almost start to construct chords, and some people will call these cluster chords, because this is like a cluster note here. It's a real close interval. And then when I put a bass note on it, it kind of forms like a chord. In this case, if I put an A in the bass, it's kind of like an A minor 9, all right? Now, it's really only a 3-note chord, but it's kind of got plenty of sonic spectrum there. Now, here's what happens if I put a C in the bass. It's kind of like a C major 7th chord, right? If I put a G in the bass, it's kind of like a G dominant 11 chord, if you will. So it's a really cool concept to start building chords off of these. A lot of people refer to these close intervals as clusters, and they have a really interesting sound to them. So like here's another example. If I'm on the high E string and the B string, let's say if I take this interval here, if I put a D in the bass, it's kind of like a D minor 11 chord. Another example would be if let's say if I play something like that. If I put a C in the bass, it's like a sus2 chord. If I put an A in the bass, it's an A minor 11. If I put a G in the bass, it's like a G sus4 chord. So you can experiment of constructing chords out of these also. So now I've gone down this rabbit hole quite a bit over the years. What I like to do is take something like this and maybe add a note on the D string to get what's kind of like a weird sounding triad type sound. You play something like that, or something like that sounds cool, or something like this. So this is kind of where this can go too, is you can actually create kind of cluster chords with it. And I might do a separate video on that, but that's just to kind of give you a little insight as how to some of these second intervals work. A couple of other few things that I like to do with these is play them on adjacent strings. So like right here, I'll have like an E note and an F note, and then I can jump here on the next set of strings and have a G and an A. That's a major second, so this is like a half step, a minor second. And then I have a B and a C here, which is another minor second. You can almost make like a little lick out of that. And the goal there is to get them to rub together. And you get some really cool, dissonant type sounds out of that. Okay, so those are some of the ways that I like to look at major and minor seconds. These are all diatonic to the key of C. Of course, if you play them against a different sound, like a D minor, it sounds like a Dorian sound. So this also transfers over to every mode. So I'm not going to go through all of them here. I'll finish that off later. The PDF will be available in my Patreon site. Please check that out if you haven't already. Subscribe and like and all that good stuff. Until then, I'll see you next time around. Cheers.